I just heard some language here a few moments ago from some of my friends across the aisle where they said, we want the federal census employees to know we're watching you.
And I'll be honest with you. I didn't have confidence in the census the last time, and that wasn't under you, and that was in the Trump administration. We're trying to determine now whether we're going to have confidence in the census moving forward. And I just think it's very important that every one of those 10,000 employees in the census understand that we're watching the census, and we expect with the technology, with the massive budget you have, with all these federal employees, we expect a better product than what we got in this last census, because this last census was not acceptable. It was political, and you know, we're very disappointed in the Census Bureau.
That should be chilling. We are the Oversight Committee, and our job is to conduct oversight, but it is not to intimidate federal employees, and that's wrong, and we're going to fight it.
In May of 2022, the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit affirmed a lower court's decision revoking an approved mine plan for the Rosemont Copper Mine project in Arizona. Essentially, this court's ruling puts the cart before the horse and fails to reflect the process of how a company actually develops a mine. If allowed to stand, the Rosemont decision would require the discovery and determination of a valid mineral deposit, meaning that operators must prove the existence of a commercially developable deposit on a claim before a plan of operations can be approved.
Why the heck are we back on the House floor 1 week? Yeah, that's right. 1 week after we voted on a bipartisan basis to send this bad bill back to committee because it couldn't even be supported on the floor once. But yet here we are, and our friends are trying to pass it once again without revision, without changes, because they think they found a few extra spare votes. This bill is not about clarifying a court decision. It's about giving more minerals away to those who would like unfettered access to our public lands. It would give the opportunity for multinational corporations and adversarial nations to control even more of our resources without having to pay royalties to the U.S. government and to tie up claims on our public lands, whether or not there are minerals actually present there. Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask for unanimous consent to enter the entire Trump Project 2025 into the record so that the American people can have it at their disposal for reference for this hearing.
Very good. I don't think anyone on this side has ever read that, but apparently you all have, so we'll enter it into the record without objection. So ordered.
Thank you so much. And again, I just appreciate the transparency of this particular committee, because last week, right after the debate, we tried to enter it into the record in the House Natural Resources Committee, and 3 members on the GOP side of the aisle actually objected to putting it in the record. And I have to say, we were genuinely shocked, because I've never seen an objection to a UC to put evidence in the record. But it was very clear in that hearing that the GOP was trying to distance themselves from this document. So, you know, I think it's interesting that we're here today, where we've got the authors of the document, and I just want to say welcome to the American people to your campaign stop on the Donald Trump campaign. Here we are in the Oversight Committee, and we've got a bunch of former Trump and current Trump officials. We've got authors of Project 2025, which is the blueprint for the next presidential transition. And the last stop for the Trump campaign was the House floor last night, because Donald Trump asked the House GOP leadership to put a CR on the floor that they knew was not going to pass, that had a voter bill attached to it, and then he told everyone to vote against it. I share my colleague AOC's just absolute shock a few moments ago. If you roll back the tape, I saw something. I have worked in the federal government for over a decade, and I have never seen anyone object to a unanimous consent to put evidence into the record.
Chairman, may I ask for a unanimous consent request, please? Since Mr. Graves has invited it, I think this is probably a good time to enter all 920 pages of Trump's Project 2025 into the record, where you can see on page 61, for example, the call for giving project proponents more control over regulatory clocks, page 524, for example, which rescinds the Biden rules and reinstates Trump rules under CEQ reforms. For NEPA, page 533, for example, where the Department of Interior is mandated to reinstate secretarial orders under the Trump administration, including time and page limits on NEPA documents. Page 533, for example, where consideration of eliminating judicial review and the challenges to the adequacy of NEPA documents, it goes on, and I would request unanimous
Reserving the
consent.
right to object.
I object also.
Reserving the right to object. Mr. Chairman, I have a question. How many trees would it take to print that? I'm just,
And they didn't even print the secret fourth pillar that's their radical emergency orders for the first 180 days. It's a great question.
So, Mr. Chairman, I
Withdraw.
think President Trump and his campaign has denied any dealings with 2025. Last night, he said in the debate that he never has read it, nor does he want to read it. So to say
says
that
some
is
parts
Trump,
are good.
Excuse me, I've got the floor. To say that this is his project, I think is wrong, and it's wrong to enter it into the records.
Mr. Chairman, this is about this committee, not even waiting for Donald Trump, actually proceeding now to implement parts of Project 2025. I can't imagine anything more relevant given the subject matter of this hearing, so I will request unanimous consent to enter it into the record so we can demystify this for Mr. Graves and others who seem to think that there's not a direct line.
So is there objection to entering the 2025 report that is not the Trump report as stated by Mr. Huffman?
Just written by Trump's complete inner circle, but yes.
There is objection.
I hope people will take note of that. I've never seen that before. And we had multiple members object to putting Project 2025 in the record today. And what's shocking about that, truly shocking, is first of all, it doesn't even have to be in the record, you guys. It's online. You can just Google it. It's right here. And if you read it, AOC actually read from page 61 of this report, which was written by Donald Trump's OMB director. The section on CEQ is specifically about the provisions that are in the bills that are on this agenda today. It literally is calling for the things that are in this bill. That is literally what it says. You can read it. It's right here online. And not only does it say that it should implement what Donald Trump did during his administration, it says right here on page 61 it should go further. It says that it should use the judicial review that the Supreme Court just put into place by overturning Chevron deference to make it possible for the administration to go further. So when my friends across the aisle, and I respect and I want to work with you all on a bipartisan basis, say that Project 2025 has nothing to do with what's happening here today, it has everything to do with what's happening here today because it's all right here in this document. So I'm just genuinely shocked. I hope people will replay the clip over and over again of the objection that just happened here a few moments ago, because I have never seen that happen. Mr. Winfrey, Dr. Winfrey, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it. I was really interested to see that you are the author of Chapter 24, Project 2025 on the Federal Reserve. Is that correct?
That's right. There'll be a quiz afterwards.
Well, you know what? I was reading it while I was sitting here, and there's some really interesting economic theories. So I'm a bit of an economics geek, so I was interested. And one of the sub-chapters in Project 2025, Chapter 24 that you wrote talks about free banking, and it's one of the features. And you alluded to it in your testimony in terms of sort of returning the purse strings back to Congress in terms of the budget process for the federal government. But as I understand this economic theory that you're putting forward around the concept of free banking is to essentially deregulate the money market and interest and to return banking regulation to the banks. Is that correct?
So I don't actually recommend free banking. What I do is I make a series of recommendations for how to rethink monetary policy under the current system where the Federal Reserve controls monetary policy through an independent Fed, which I think is really important.
But is
I
the
then
effect,
go
Mr.
through
Winfrey,
a series of other theoretical
But Mr. Winfrey, hold on just a
ideas-
second. Let me
Well,
just
hold on.
clarify my
I go through
question.
it.
Let me clarify my
Sure.
question. Do you have a subchapter in your chapter that is titled Free Banking?
And what does it say at the end of the chapter, of the subchapter?
Just answer the question, sir.
It says that.
Yes, the answer is yes,
It says that
correct,
this is a
right?
suboptimal way of conducting monetary policy. I also
Miss
list a
Dr.
series
Winfrey,
of
let's
other.
clarify. So Project 2025 is a presidential transition document, correct? It's the intent of this document as it was drafted was to provide a transition document regarding policies that you would hope the next conservative administration would adopt. Is that correct?
It is a.
That's what it's designed
It's
to
a
be.
book that was published by the Heritage Foundation. And when I wrote that chapter, I was employed by the Heritage Foundation. I am no longer employed by Heritage.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I want to just point out, thank you, that the stated purpose by the Heritage Foundation and the over 100 conservative organizations involved in this document is for it to provide a transition document for the Trump administration. And while I understand that our colleagues have been trying to distance themselves from it, it is the playbook that was put forward by the conservative community for the next administration. And I appreciate your clarifications this morning, but Mr. Chairman, I would like to like to ask for unanimous consent to have Project 2025 admitted into the record for this hearing. It's relevant to Mr. Winfrey, Dr. Winfrey's testimony.
All 900 plus pages?
Yes, sir.
All right. Without objection?
All right.
So ordered.
And I really encourage the American people to crack this book open, and you can Google it and find it and read for yourselves. You can read about free banking, about deregulating the banks, about allowing our banking system and economy to be deregulated so that they can do what they want. And we all know what the outcome of that is. We saw the huge crash that happened in 2008 that devastated our economy, wiped out people's wealth, wiped out their savings, wiped out teachers who had their retirement accounts completely destroyed, people who lost their homes, who ended up homeless as a result of it. And so I appreciate that you're bringing these ideas. I'm all for debate on big ideas, but we already have tried, and Donald Trump has tried some of these policies, and they were devastating for the American economy. I just want that to be clear. Now, I want to clear up a couple of other things. Ms. Onwuka for Economic Opportunity Independent Women's Forum. We had another witness last week from the Independent Women's Forum. It's an organization that's also involved in Project 2025. You guys have a number of contributors, correct?
I can't speak to that, but I do know at least one person who did author a chapter, not me.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. But I do want to clarify that some of the statements that were made this morning about price gouging and especially around the energy sector are just unfactual. The American people know they're being price gouged. Go grocery shopping. We see it. We see it every day. In terms of American energy, the facts do not support what was stated here. We have the highest oil and gas production in American history has happened over the last several years. The reason why gas is expensive at the pump is because these oil and gas companies are jacking up the price at the pump in order to make more money. They have record profits. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Director Santos for your diligence in spending the day with us answering questions about the United States Census. I am proud to represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, which includes Albuquerque and 10 counties in central New Mexico. And the United States Census is absolutely essential to my communities, and an accurate count is very essential to my communities because we are tribal communities, we are rural communities, we are low-income communities, and the census is essential for not only capturing, of course, who's there, what their backgrounds are, where they live, but it is absolutely essential for all of the federal services that our communities depend on to survive. Everything from housing programs to food programs to roads, you name it. The United States Census is how we make sure that there is a fair assessment. And as has been noted this morning, the impact during 2020 of having the pandemic happen in the middle was in many ways very catastrophic, not only obviously for the fact that many people got sick, but because it happened at the most critical moment that we were trying to assess what was going on in our communities. You know, I, for one, want to say thank you to all of our census workers out there, not just the enumerators that were hired to go out there and to work with the Fair Count organizations that stepped up to the plate, but to the people who do the hard work behind the scenes. Many people know this about me because I say it almost every time here in the Oversight Committee, but I'm a former OMB employee. And OMB plays a critical role also in managing the census and making sure that the way in which we structure the census makes sense, reflects our most contemporary ideas about the purpose of the census. But I think it's important, and I know a number of folks here today have pointed out that the real purpose of the census, which goes back to our founding as a country, goes back to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, where it states very clearly that, you know, the apportionment of seats in the House of Representatives is based on a count of the whole persons in each state. And we conduct censuses to really just understand where are the humans. And, you know, there's been some rhetoric here this morning about should we count immigrants, should we count people who are from somewhere else? And, you know, I think it's important to maybe like step back and take a moment, because unless you're indigenous, unless your people have lived on this continent for thousands of years, of which we have many, many people, your families are immigrants. And when your people came to this country, whether they came of their own accord or because they were brought here, they were counted because we had censuses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is always an interesting adventure here in Congress, and especially this morning in this unexpectedly spicy hearing. You know, as a water resources professional, I spent my entire career working to make sure our communities have access to clean water and a sustainable future. So I was expecting to come into this hearing this morning to talk about NEPA, to talk about the importance of making sure that our communities have a seat at the table as we're developing infrastructure and decisions are being made on their behalf and with their consent. And, you know, I heard some conversation this morning about the need, obviously, for expediting infrastructure. We all support building infrastructure for our communities. That is why we passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill in the fall of 2021. But unfortunately, it was bipartisan, but many of the people in this room did not vote for it. But I spend a lot of my time when I'm back home in New Mexico working across the aisle with my community partners to get that infrastructure built. It's water pipelines, it's broadband, and that was made possible because of the visionary leadership in the Congress that happened before this and by President Biden and Kamala Harris. Let's talk about NEPA for a moment. NEPA was put into place in the late 1960s. It passed and then was signed by President Nixon. It was signed and passed on a bipartisan basis. Now, I just heard a comment about how Democrats have broken trust over the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Okay, y'all, we're about to take a vote on a CR today that breaks trust on the Fiscal Responsibility Act. It actually violates the handshake deal that was made with the president over your desire to tank the economy, to shrink the budget, to take away resources, and through which you shoved through a NEPA bill that tried to gut environmental regulations. So if you want to talk about breaking trust, let's talk about that, because you're about to take a vote on a bill. And if you don't want to break trust, how about you vote for a CR to keep the government operational? But NEPA was put there as public trust to support our communities, because as Mr. Beard has pointed out in his testimony, our communities were systematically excluded across the country in opportunities for economic advancement, for meaningful jobs, and were often used in siting and putting infrastructure that not only did not benefit them, but directly harmed them. All right, well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I want to say welcome and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I respect it takes a lot to put yourself out there to come and testify in front of Congress. And I know that some of this ground has been covered before, and I really do appreciate the transparency that all of you have brought about your backgrounds, about your positions, and about your perspectives on the policy issues. But just to kind of put it all in one place, I want to quickly go through, and I'm going to mostly state it. I'll ask some questions as we go. Mr. Carr, I know you've said this has been asked and answered several times, but just, going back, we know you're currently serving in the FTC. You've been serving there since 2017, since Donald Trump appointed you, and you are the author of the FCC chapter of 2025, Project 2025, correct? It's just a yes or no.
Well, so just to be clear, the
Yes, you are. Thank you. I appreciate it. Mr.
chapter that you
Krikorian.
reference was done in my personal capacity
Yes.
after
The
getting
answer is a yes. Yes, Mr.
clearance from the
Krikorian,
FCC ethics council. I just want to clarify that wasn't in my official
Mr.
capacity.
Krikorian, you serve as the ED of the Center for Immigrant Studies. You are also on the advisory board of Project 2025. Your organization has been actually designated as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Dr. Hobbs, thank you for your service to this country. I understand you're a veteran and an academic. I do very much respect your background and your work. You're involved in the Independent Women's Forum, which is also involved in Project 2025. You've had a number of authors and contributors from the Women's Forum that are participants in Project 2025. And Ms. Gunasekara, I know we've already covered this, but you're a former chief of staff for the Trump administration at the EPA, and I think you've been very clear about your role in drafting the EPA section of Project 2025. So I think it's very clear this hearing is actually about Project 2025. We've seen over the last almost 2 years how leadership has used this committee essentially as a campaign resource. They tried to impeach Joe Biden, they tried to impugn his family, and now here we are, and we are just 48 days, 47 days until the election, and now they're trying to attack Kamala Harris and use the resources of this committee and to platform future Trump administration officials and their agenda, and to try to normalize what are frankly very extreme policies. And we heard from one of the witnesses today that in fact, not only do they support dismantling our federal government, but would support doing even more damage than was done during the Trump administration and even what is recommended inside of this book. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 2925 and would like to remind my friends across the aisle that mining is already happening on American lands and on our public lands. But this week, instead of working on meaningful legislation on behalf of the American people, our friends have opted instead to focus on a toxic free-for-all on our public lands, have opted to focus on legislation to roll back energy efficiency in home appliances. In fact, they put forward a bill this week called Hands Off Our Home Appliances because they're so concerned about the American people that they want to regulate the efficiency of your toasters, your dishwashers, your refrigerators, and undermine the ability of our immigrant and our Hispano communities to have representation in the United States Senate and United States Census, and yes, to allow a free-for-all on our public lands. Now, the American people are not asking us to do this. They are asking us to work on real problems, to work on the economy, inflation, helping families put food on the table and a roof over their head, protecting our reproductive rights and access to the ballot box, protecting our democracy, and dealing with the international crises that are happening on multiple continents. Let's talk about mining laws. The existing mining law of 1872 already gives our mining companies, including foreign-owned companies, the right to extract on our publicly owned lands. They can also do so without having to pay even 1 cent in royalties. That includes companies that are controlled by governments of adversarial nations. This is not only a shameful giveaway, but a huge national security vulnerability for the United States. This would make it impossible to invalidate a mining claim, even if their real intent was other things, maybe to lock up development of other uses or buying them for other uses, including construction of transmission lines or other things that they would want to do. This should be of deep concern to anyone who does not want adversarial nations or the companies that operate in them to control our public lands or minerals. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle argue that it's either mine here or mine abroad and create a false equivalency, but it's not that simple. Some of the countries that are trying to expand their mining operations here in the United States, in fact, many of these multinational corporations, are owned as subsidiaries under countries like China and other countries that we have adversarial relationships with. They also engage in practices that we know cause human rights abuses, things like slave labor elsewhere in the world. And while my friends across the aisle have tried to claim that this is really about mining on American lands, it's about granting unfettered access to these corporations. In fact, these entities can ship the minerals that they take from American lands anywhere in the world and smelt those materials on the cheap, also relying on human rights abuses abroad to cut costs. Now, as I said, we already had this debate last week, and the outcome was that the entire House, right here on this floor, voted to send this toxic bill back to the Natural Resources Committee. In fact, that hadn't happened in years because this bill was so flawed and such a giveaway to foreign national-owned companies and a threat to our national security that it was agreed that it wasn't ready for prime time and shouldn't be passed on the floor. My colleague from New Mexico, Representative Teresa Ledger Fernandez, offered a motion to send the bill back to committee so that we could discuss amending the bill to ban these adversarial corporations operated in adversarial nations from mining and locking up our public lands. And I have to say, I was heartened. We had 6 Republicans join the Democrats to do just that, who said, you know what, we're not going to vote for this bill. Well, it's about time. We need some bipartisan support to double down in protecting U.S. interests.